5 ships. Each longer than the Titanic by 100 meters. Each carrying 24,000 containers, and captains fear them more than hurricanes, not because of storms, but because of something silent that can flip a calm ship sideways in minutes. No warning. No red light. Just physics waiting to align. Stay till the end, I'll show you exactly what it is. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. June 17, 2013. The Indian Ocean, about 200 miles off the coast of Yemen. Early morning, monsoon season, waves of roughly 5.5 meters, a strong and steady wind, unpleasant weather, but for this stretch of ocean at this time of year, completely normal. A 316-meter container ship is sailing from Singapore to the Saudi port of Jeddah, carrying 4,382 containers and 3,000 tons of fuel. The ship is called Moel Comfort. It's 5 years old. The crew feels something strange in the hull, a vibration you can feel through your feet. A steel beam the length of 3 football fields is arching in the middle. Bow and stern begin tilting downward. From the direction of cargo hold 6 comes the sound of metal tearing apart. Water floods in, and there's no way to stop it. The captain sends the distress signal just before 8:30 a.m. An hour later, the crew abandons ship. All 26 survive, picked up by 3 vessels that respond to the call. By then, the hull has already split in 2, the crack running the full height of the ship's side. The 2 halves drift apart, pulled kilometers away from each other by current and wind. The ship sinks on June 27, taking 100 tons of fuel oil down with it. The bow section catches fire during the tow and sinks separately, in water roughly 3 kilometers deep, on July 11. 5 years old, built by one of the best shipyards in the world, and it broke in half in what any sailor on that route would call ordinary weather. To understand how, you first have to understand what these ships have become. Capacity is measured in TEU, 20-foot equivalent units, the industry's standard shipping box. A single container, about 6 meters long, can hold roughly the volume of a small one-bedroom apartment. Around half the cargo sits below deck, under heavy hatch covers. The other half is stacked directly on deck, in towers up to 8 containers high, roughly the height of a 9-story building, crossing the ocean at about 40 kilometers per hour, held together by nothing more than thin steel bars and twist locks at the corners of adjoining boxes. This tower doesn't sit on a foundation, it sits on a deck that flexes with every wave. Below deck, a 2-stroke diesel engine the size of a 3-story house turns a single-piece propeller more than 10 meters across, power equivalent to roughly 1,000 passenger cars starting simultaneously. Fully loaded, the ship draws about 16 meters of water, a 5-story building's worth of hull you never see. And all of it, a 400-meter, $200 million floating structure, is run by a crew of about 25 people. That crew size is the ship's entire economic logic. 25 people managing a facility longer than 4 football fields only makes sense because the more containers a hull carries, the less fuel, crew cost, and port fee gets attributed to each box. That arithmetic drove the relentless growth in ship size, until port geography put a hard stop on it. Now let's look at the current top 5, lined up almost in formation. 5th place, HMM Algeciras. Delivered in 2020 to a South Korean carrier, 23,964 TEU, the ship that opened the modern giant era. 4th place, Ever Alat, delivered in 2022, 24,004 TEU, the first vessel in history to break the 24,000 container mark. 3rd place, MSC Tessa, at 24,116 TEU. 2nd place, OOCL Spain, at 24,188 TEU. And 1st place, MSC Irina, delivered March 9, 2023. 24,346 containers, the current world record for a single hull. She measures 399.99 meters, 1 centimeter short of 400. That centimeter is not an accident, and the reason will become clear shortly. Beneath her hull, an air lubrication system pumps a continuous layer of bubbles along the bottom, cutting friction with the water. Look closely at the spread inside this top 5, the difference between first and sixth place is under 600 containers, about 2%, and the order changes every time a new ship is delivered. Every one of these vessels has run into the same invisible ceiling, built not by naval engineers, but by ports. Ship size is dictated by berths, cranes, and channel depth. 400 meters is the practical limit at most deep water terminals. 61 meters of beam is the outer reach of a quay crane working across the deck. It has to reach containers on the far side, or the ship can't be unloaded. Draft runs into channel depth, which rarely exceeds 17 meters anywhere in the world. The new Panama Canal locks, opened in 2016, allow ships up to 366 meters long and 51 meters wide, concrete limits poured into the chamber walls. Every ship in our top 5 is roughly 10 meters too wide. There's no permit or workaround for that, none of these 5 has ever transited Panama, and none ever will. That leaves Suez, which has no locks at all, the only constraint there is draft. A ship that doesn't fit the port can't unload, and a ship that can't unload earns nothing. That's where the missing centimeter on MSC Irina comes from. But a hull built right up against port dimensions has a property nobody advertises: it becomes a solid vertical wall, exposed to anything that blows against it. March 23, 2021. The Suez Canal is running completely normally. In the northbound convoy, fifth in line, is a container ship called Ever Given. 400 meters long, 59 meters wide, 21,124 containers on board. The navigable width of the canal at this point is about 120 meters, the passage is roughly twice the width of the ship, which sounds like margin until you understand what's coming. That morning, a sandstorm rolls through with winds gusting to 74 kilometers per hour. The loaded side of the ship, hull plus 12 stories of stacked containers, forms a wall 400 meters long, a sail roughly the size of 2 football fields standing on end. No rudder on Earth can steer against that if the wind hits it broadside. The ship starts moving erratically, speed dropping to around 3 knots in a channel meant for 8. At that speed in a narrow channel, a second effect kicks in: bank suction. Water squeezed between the hull and the sloped canal wall accelerates, pressure in that gap drops, and the stern gets pulled toward the bank. At 7:40 a.m., the bow tears into the eastern slope, the stern settles into the western one, and a 400-meter ship jams the canal like a mop wedged sideways in a narrow hallway. Traffic stops in both directions. By March 27, more than 300 ships are queued at either end. The canal isn't cleared until March 29, 14 tugboats, dredgers, and a Dutch salvage team working the refloat. Egyptian authorities blamed navigational error, the ship's owner blamed the wind. That argument dragged on for years. The physics was never in dispute for even a minute. With a 400-meter sail, a ship stops obeying its rudder long before any actual storm arrives. And wind brings 2 more effects invisible from shore. The first is the blind spot: the bridge sits far back from the bow, with containers stacked in front of it, leaving a sector several hundred meters long where the watch officer simply cannot see. A small boat entering that zone vanishes from view and often from radar too. The second is stopping distance, and the numbers are genuinely unsettling. International rules allow up to 15 ship lengths of coasting distance in an emergency stop. For a 400-meter ship, that's 6 kilometers after the order for full reverse, roughly an hour of brisk walking, during which the ship is still moving under its own momentum. Maneuvers on a vessel this size have to be planned tens of minutes in advance, not minutes. Wind and inertia are at least things we can picture, because cars have taught us intuition for both. What comes next, intuition doesn't prepare you for at all. We tend to picture a ship's hull as rigid. It isn't, it bends, and it bends noticeably. Take a long wooden ruler and rest both ends on 2 stools, the middle sags visibly. Hold the ruler at the center instead, and now the ends sag. That's exactly what happens to a hull riding an ocean swell, except the ruler here is 400 meters long. When a wave crest sits under the middle of the ship, bow and stern lose their support, the bottom of the hull compresses, and the deck stretches. In the trough between waves, the picture reverses. On a single ocean crossing, this cycle repeats tens of thousands of times. There's a third motion too, arguably the sneakiest of all, built on impact. A bow with a wide, flared shape drops into an oncoming wave and slaps it flat. After that slap, the 400-meter beam rings like a steel table struck with a knife, and those vibrations stack on top of the normal bending load, spiking stress by tens of % for a fraction of a second. This is what happened that morning off Yemen. Japan's Class NK Classification Society completed its investigation in 2014. The failure started below deck, where steel plating at the bottom of cargo hold 6, built to resist compression and hold back external water pressure, began to buckle under the combined load, and the failure spread through the whole beam of the ship. The bending moment approached the structural limit of the hull, and the margin was thin. Inspectors then examined 6 sister ships from the same production series and found bulges roughly 20 mm deep in their hull bottoms, about the thickness of 2 stacked coins, and evidence the steel had already exceeded its elastic limit. All 6 ships were pulled from service and reinforced. Japan's Government Committee on Large Ship Safety published its final report in 2015, rewriting strength requirements to account for lateral loading and bow slam impact. One Morning in the Indian Ocean rewrote the design rulebook for the entire global fleet. We've dealt with hull strength. The next threat grows quietly, sealed inside a closed compartment. You can't see it, and you can't shut it off. March 6, 2018. The Arabian Sea, 900 miles off India. A container ship called Maersk Honam sails from Singapore toward Suez, carrying 7,860 containers and 27 crew, in calm weather. At 8:15 in the evening, a smoke detector triggers in cargo hold 3. The crew follows procedure, cooling the bulkheads with water, then flooding the space with carbon dioxide to displace the oxygen inside. It doesn't slow the fire down at all. By 10:15, the crew is abandoning ship, and the superstructure is already burning. 23 people are rescued by a responding vessel, 5 of that ship's own crew never made it home. The fire burned for more than a week before salvage crews could board. The burned hull was towed away, rebuilt, and returned to service under a different name over a year later. Singapore's transport safety investigators never pinned down an exact ignition source. The fire had destroyed too much evidence. But the investigation surfaced a problem that touches every container line on Earth. A chemical stored in the hold, prone to self-heating and decomposition, had been declared under a lower hazard category than its properties warranted. On paper, the cargo looked almost harmless. The arithmetic behind this kind of disaster is completely unforgiving. A fire in a hold under a sealed hatch can't be put out from outside. Carbon dioxide displaces oxygen, but a self-heating chemical generates its own oxygen as it burns. Reaching the seat of the fire is physically impossible, with thousands of tons of someone else's cargo stacked between the crew and the flames, and no fireboats in the middle of an ocean. A shipper who honestly declares a hazardous classification pays more and waits longer, and the temptation to write something safer sounding on the paperwork exists in every warehouse on the planet. The World Shipping Council has since launched a program to audit hazard declarations against known danger signatures before a box is ever loaded aboard, and dangerous containers are now positioned deliberately away from the superstructure and engine room. Fire and wind at least leave a window to react, minutes, sometimes hours. The last thread on this list doesn't give you that. Before every departure, a ship's loading plan is calculated with real precision. Software takes the weight and stack position of every container and works out the load on each lashing point, the twist lock connecting adjacent boxes, roughly the size of a garden trowel head, rated to hold several tons. The entire deck cargo, tens of thousands of tons, rests on these fittings, engineered for a specific, modest angle of roll. Inside that limit, the lashings hold. Beyond it, the margin doesn't fail gradually, it fails all at once. So what has to happen at sea for a calm-looking ship to roll past its own design angle? November 30, 2020. The Pacific Ocean, northwest of Hawaii. A container ship called One Apus is sailing from China to Long Beach, 364 meters long, more than 14,000 boxes aboard. Conditions were logged at roughly force 4, with swells of 5 to 6 meters. Force 4 is the wind that stirs thin branches on trees onshore. No hurricane, no rogue wave, just an ordinary Pacific crossing. In a single night, the ship lost 1,816 containers overboard, with several hundred more crushed into a mangled heap on deck. 64 of the lost boxes carried hazardous cargo, now impossible to recover from open ocean. When the ship limped into Kobe, the deck looked like it had exploded. The investigation ran for months, and the ship didn't sail again until the following spring. So what actually happened that night, in weather rated force 4? The phenomenon is called parametric rolling, and the mechanics are simpler than the outcome suggests. Look at a modern container ship's shape, a narrow, sharp bow below the waterline that flares out abruptly above it, over a bottom that's wide and nearly flat, built to fit as many rows of containers as possible. That shape delivers capacity, but it hides a cost. When the bow pitches down into a head sea, the wide flared part of the hull submerges, the waterplane area grows, and stability increases. Seconds later, the keel lifts, exposing bow and stern, the waterplane area shrinks, and stability collapses, swinging twice with every single wave. On its own, that's not dangerous. The danger starts when the rhythms line up. Every ship has a natural roll period, for a giant like this, roughly 20 seconds. If waves arrive from ahead or astern at close to double that frequency, the two rhythms lock together. The ship rolls, stability drops right when it's needed most, and nothing slows the tilt. The ship swings back, stability rebuilds, and that rebuilt stability shoves it hard toward the opposite side, like a heavy door pushed at exactly the rhythm of its own swing. Each push is small, but the amplitude grows with every cycle. Within minutes, the roll reaches 30 to 40 degrees each way. At 40 degrees, you're not standing on deck, you're hanging off the railing. An 8-story stack of containers at that angle becomes a pendulum weighing hundreds of tons, overwhelming what the lashings were ever designed to resist, and the fittings let go all at once. A single 40-foot box weighs about the same as a city bus, and when it drops, it rolls across the deck, taking out everything in its path. None of this is new. The first serious cases were studied back in the 1990s. In October 1998, a ship called APL China rolled to 40 degrees in the Pacific, losing 406 containers and returning to port with roughly 1,000 more damaged. This is exactly why captains fear resonance more than any hurricane. A storm shows up on the weather chart days in advance, and ships route around it. Parametric rolling shows nothing, because it doesn't need a storm, just a long, uniform swell matching the ship's own length, arriving at a period close to half its natural roll cycle. Radar shows nothing unusual, the barometer sits steady, the wind is moderate, and the ship simply starts rolling more than it should. Within minutes, it's already too late to reverse it. The defense, in principle, is strikingly simple: break the rhythm by changing course or speed so the waves arrive at a different frequency. Modern ships carry systems that flag dangerous combinations of heading and swell, and international stability rules now check for exactly this kind of motion, but the final call still rests with the officer on watch, staring at instruments where nothing is glowing red. That's the answer promised at the start of this video. Captains don't fear sheer size on its own, they fear coincidence: wave rhythm with hull rhythm, cargo load with the failure limit of a steel plate at the bottom of the ship, smoldering cargo sealed inside a hold with no fireboats for 1,000 miles. The World Shipping Council recorded 1,478 containers lost at sea in 2025, out of roughly 280 million that crossed the world's oceans that year, about one box lost for every 190,000 moved. 2013 remains the worst year on record, and it was in June of that year that Moel Comfort went down off the coast of Yemen. Since January 2026, every container lost overboard must be reported under international convention. Until now, that reporting depended entirely on the carrier's own willingness to disclose it. 400 meters turned out to be the point where ordinary intuition about big ships stops working. A vessel this size behaves like a long, flexible beam that can fall into resonance with the ocean itself. The scene that failed at the bottom of that sixth hold was built to the standards of its era. The rules changed after that hull came apart, not before that morning. That's how this industry has worked for 200 years. Every new engineering limit gets found the same way: build something a little bigger than before, and wait for the moment it breaks. Almost everything sitting in your house right now once rode across an ocean in a box exactly like the ones on these decks. Between that container and your living room, there's an ocean, a long uniform swell, and someone's calculation, made before the ship ever left port.